These two lenses may be compared to two almost identical cars with only one major difference. The first has a manual transmission, the second one automatic. The rest is more or less the same. Well, almost. But if you're still curious about my non-scientific comparison, keep watching this video to see these lenses side by side. First of all, a little bit of prehistory. This Samyang lens I purchased back in 2014, more than 7 years ago, to be able to shoot nicer videos with my APS-C Pentax K30 DSLR yellow camera. Autofocus in this camera is pretty okay in photo mode, but video? It would be fair to say that there's no autofocus in video mode, so I had to purchase a manual lens. And this is how my adventure started, with shooting video in manual mode with a Samyang 24mm t1.5 Cine lens. It lasted for about 5 years, I totally nailed it, and then I purchased my Sony a7 III camera with a couple of autofocus lenses. Right after that I decided to pay more attention to my YouTube channel and started to shoot more often myself. The thing is that Sony a7 III has no flip screen, so I have to rely on an autofocus. That is why the only lenses I am interested in right now are autofocus lenses. I bought a 16-35mm f4, then 85mm f1.8, but still I felt that I was missing something. I had no fast autofocus wide-angle lens. So at the beginning of this year, I finally got this beast, Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master lens, as a replacement for my Samyang lens. And after almost 1 month of using it, I finally may compare both. I prepared 7 items on my checklist that are pretty important for me. For each of them, I'll be giving 1 point to the lens that is better in any of these categories. They are very subjective, quite random, as they refer to both photos and video, but if you're still watching this video, that means that you're still interested in my opinion. I disqualified an autofocus feature right away from this list, despite this being one of the most important reasons why I purchased Sony lens, but that would be unfair to Samyang, which doesn't have an autofocus by default. Well, alright then, let's just move to the first item on the list, which is an aperture range. So, when you buy a lens, obviously one of the first things we pay attention to is an aperture and what is the minimum f value that it offers. And as we know, the lower the f number, the wider the lens is opening and the more light it lets to get in. Thus, it's much easier to shoot in low light conditions and it gives us more blurry background. If we have a look at the lowest value of both lenses, it is 1.5 for Samyang and 1.4 for Sony. Technically, it is less than 1/5 of a stop difference, and you may not even notice it while shooting. We can see that both lenses present similar brightness, with the aperture wide open. However, the Samyang lens has a little bit more vignetting. But if we are talking about the maximum value, here we can see that Samyang offers f value up to 22. Sony, on the other hand, only f16. This is a one-stop difference, and it may save your shot during the very bright day if you don't have a filter with you. Of course, you may compensate for the difference using the shutter, but in many cases it's not the best solution. Additionally, Sony lens has one extra feature that allows to change the aperture smoothly or having the clicks between f's. Samyang doesn't have such a feature, but despite that, due to the fact that the aperture range itself is bigger in the Samyang lens for about one stop, the first point travels to Samyang. Alright, next item is sharpness. To be able to measure sharpness of each lens, I decided to take the same picture using different f values. First we'll shoot with an aperture wide open for both of them, afterwards we'll shoot with an f4. That will give us the idea how sharp the lenses are using the less comfortable conditions for focusing. And to better see the sharpness of the lenses, I will use a shelf with books, as it will be easier for me to see the difference in focus on the text, which has a very nice contrast. Let's now take the photos using both lenses, and afterwards we'll switch to the Lightroom. By the way, probably you've noticed before from the examples I've already shared, and you can actually see it right now as well, that the image from Samyang is a little bit more zoomed. I'm not sure what is the exact reason, as both lenses are 24mm. The only explanation I have right now is the fact that I use an adapter on the Samyang lens with my Sony camera, as originally I bought it for my Pentax camera. So the lens is naturally getting stretched, and thus the image might be minimally cropped. Well, anyway, we have our photos, let's get into the Lightroom. Looking at the pictures taken with an aperture wide open, 1.5 for Samyang and 1.4 for Sony, I may tell right away without hesitations that Sony G Master lens is way sharper. I first thought that probably I didn't focus well with Samyang, but after taking a series of shots with the different focusing ring positions and getting the same result, I deduced that probably this is how it is. Not terrible, not great, but with several glowing artifacts, lack of contrast, and the image itself is just too soft for me. Probably also because this is a cine lens and it's not supposed to be super sharp, especially at f1.5, but obviously it failed this sharpness test. With the f4, things are getting much better for Samyang. It looks much sharper with less of those glowing artifacts. The Sony image looks also pretty great, and if we compare them side by side, I cannot say I see any major differences. What do you think? Of course, the lenses have different color signs, but generally speaking, as for me, they are almost identical at f4. My conclusion: the Samyang lens could be much sharper with a wide open aperture. The Sony G Master lens, on the other hand, was great in both tests. Big respect and easy point to Sony. Alright, let's move to focus distance. So on the paper, both lenses show their capability to focus on objects pretty close to the sensor. In the case of Samyang, it is 25 cm, and in the case of Sony, it is 24 cm, only 1 cm less. I trust the information in the specifications, but of course I wanted to perform my own test, and I should say that I confirmed my expectations. Samyang and Sony had no issues with focus. The distances between the sensor and the object were exactly the same as in the specifications. Assuming that 1 cm or 0.4 inches is not a huge difference, both lenses have pretty similar focusing distance, which is really short, and that is great, especially if you need to shoot some close-ups or you enjoy macro photography. If you have good zoom on your camera body like Sony a7 III has, your 24mm prime lens literally transforms into a macro lens. So all in all, great focusing distance, both lenses get 1 point from me. Colors and distortion. Well, these criteria are pretty cumulative, and they relate not only to the artistic perception of the image, but also to the physical parameters of the lenses that influence the image itself, such as chromatic aberration, vignetting, or image distortion. And the best way to check all the artifacts and differences in the colors is to wide open the aperture and compare the images side by side. So let's have a look one more time at the video examples I was sharing while talking about the aperture. Here we can clearly see several differences. First of all, in the color itself. To my subjective opinion, Samyang gives more of a yellowish character to the image. Sony is more neutral if I compare it to the reality or what I was looking at while shooting this video. But not only this, we can clearly see that vignetting is much more visible in the Samyang lens. The edges of the image are definitely darker than the image captured by Sony. Some people like it, some people don't. I prefer to not have it unless I want to add it in post-production. Next item I want to focus on is chromatic aberration. Let's zoom in and compare the parts of the image where it can be visible the most. In my case, these are the branches of the tree that are touching bright clouds, creating a textbook example of such comparison. Again, Samyang seems to be performing a little bit worse than Sony. We see more of this magenta glow along the branches, but in defense I should say that Sony image is not 100% clean of chromatic aberration too. However, looks somewhat better. Last thing in this category that I wanted to pay attention to is distortion. Of course, the new software allows to get rid of any distortion pretty fast, but if we're looking for the image which is visually more correct, we can see that again Sony wins. If you have a look at the center of the edges of the Samyang image, you will see how distorted they are, thus you'll need more time in post-production for this additional correction effort. So taking into consideration all these criteria, Sony wins this part of competition, getting another point in my comparison. Size. On my list of important items that I take into account is also the size of the lens. I am very minimalistic if we're talking about carrying the gear, so I hate when it takes a lot of space in my backpack. And without even looking into the specifications, I see that the Samyang lens is larger than the Sony lens. But if you would like to know the exact differences, I will leave the links in the description to these products and you can check later on your own. So, an easy point for Sony, and let's move forward to the next item on the list, which is weight. Okay, this test will also be very easy. No specifications needed to feel that Samyang lens is much heavier than Sony, and that's understandable because the Samyang lens has more massive construction, a huge focusing ring for the follow focus system, which is by the way is very nice in touch and smooth, however pretty tough during the cold weather. It has also an impressive front of the lens. I remember I had to buy one of the biggest ND filters with a diameter of 77mm, which makes the lens even heavier if you would like to put it in a glide cam or gimbal. 640 grams versus 445 grams. The difference is 195 grams. It's almost the same as a bag of pretzel hearts or a packet of Grana Padano cheese. This is a huge difference, and unfortunately to Samyang, the point again travels to Sony. Last thing I want to talk about today is price. And what about price? Everything is pretty simple. For the price of the Sony lens, I could buy 2 Samyang lenses and there would be still $100 left in my pocket. And a lot of people complain about that. Yes, it's prime quality, yes, it has a lot of features and an autofocus which Samyang doesn't have, but still I think it's a little bit overpriced. Nevertheless, Samyang wins the category. Alright, we have a full list of my subjective scores, and the winner is Sony, which has a 2 points advantage. As you remember, at the very beginning I excluded an autofocus from the list just to not give Sony a very easy extra point, but as we can see, even without this very important feature, Sony wins this very subjective and non-scientific competition. Guys, that's all I have for you today. Hope it was useful and you liked my comparison. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel and Instagram. Check out my other videos over here and have a nice day. Cheers!